Welcome to this comprehensive tutorial on control structures in Python. Control structures are a fundamental part of any programming language, and they allow you to control the flow of your code. There are three main control structures. The first control structure we're going to look at is the if-else statements. They are used to execute a block of code based on whether a certain condition is met. The syntax is very simple. It has two parts, the if part and the else part. In the if part, that's where we specify the condition and we write the code that we would like to execute if the condition is true. We write it here. And if the condition is false, then we write our piece of code here that we would like to execute. We can do a few examples in Jupyter Notebook. Demonstrate how to work with if-else statements. We can use two examples. The first example, suppose that you have a variable x and you wanted to check if the value of x is greater than 3, then we can do the following. That's our example. If suppose now you have the value of x to be 5 and you want to check if it's greater than 3, then we use the if statement. If x is greater than 3, then what do we want to do? We want to print out the value of x to be value of x is greater than 3. The condition will be checked. If it's true, this will be printed out. But if it's not true, then we print the else part. The else part will do the opposite of whatever happened here. Or you can specify a different piece of code. But in this case, we just want to check if it's true or not true. So we print out x is not greater than 3. If we execute this, then we see that x is greater than 3, which means this has been executed. The reason for that is that the condition was checked and it was ascertained that this is true. Given that it's true, this piece of code will be executed, and that's why we got x is greater than 3. Suppose now we had our value of x to be 2. Let's see what happens. If I execute this, I get x is not greater than 3. The reason for this is because the condition was checked and we have is 2 greater than 3. The answer is no, which means that this will return false, which means the second part will be executed and hence x is not greater than 3 was printed out. I hope that is clear. And there's also some instances where you'd like to check more than one condition. For example, suppose that you had a number or the variable x with a value, with a certain value, and you wanted to check if the value of that variable is greater than 10. If it so happened that it's not greater than 10, it's less than 10, then check another condition, which is check if it is greater than 3. So there are two layers. First, check if it's greater than 10. If true, then we're going to execute something. If it's not true, we check if it's greater than 3 and do something else. If those two conditions are not met, then automatically say it's not greater than 3. So the first thing we need is our variable x is assigned the value, let's say 6. So we want to check the first condition. So we say if x is greater than 10, then what do we want to do? We print out that the value of x is greater than 10. If that is not true, then we use the keyword elif, which stands for else if. Else if x is greater than 3, then what do? We print out that the value of x is greater than 3, but not greater than 10. What if now these two conditions are not met? Then we use the else component. The else component will mean that if these two have not been met, then it means that the value of x is less than 3, or we can simply say it's not greater than 3. So we print out x is not greater than 3. Let's now check what we get if we execute the cell. We see that x is greater than 3, but not greater than 10. Suppose now, instead of having 6 as the value of x, what if we had 2 and we execute? We get x is not greater than 3. The reason for that is that the else part has been executed. And what happened, what Python did is that it came here, replaced the value of x to be 2, and checked the condition. Is x greater than 10? Of course, it's false. So, because it's false, it goes to the next condition, check the next condition. So, it came to replace x here, checked if 2 is greater than 3. Is it true or false? It's false. So, has to go to the next block. The next block of which you have x. So, whatever happens, if that is not met, then we have to execute. This is the third part, of which now we return x is not greater than 3. So, suppose now, instead of 2, we had something like 14. And so what will happen here, in this case, before I even execute the cell, I'll come and check, is 14 greater than 10? Yes. So if it's true, then it prints out this. And it doesn't check any other condition, because the first instance where the condition was met, that's when it executed the code. So we can confirm that, and we see that x is greater than 10, which means the condition was met at the first instance at the if block. And that's it for if-else. The second control structure we are going to look at is the for loop. It allows you to iterate over a sequence of items, such as a list or a string. The syntax is as follows. We use the keyword for, then we write the item in sequence, and then we write a piece of code that you would like to execute on each item in that sequence. We can look at this in Jupyter Notebook. To demonstrate how to use for loops in Python, we can use several examples. And the first example I'm going to use is how to loop over a list. Suppose that we have our list called my list and has the numbers 1, 2, all the way to 4. And it's a list because it's enclosed in square brackets. Suppose now we wanted to loop over, or rather we wanted to print out 1, 2, 3, 4 in that list. Now what we do, we use a for loop. And to use a for loop, we can say for items in my list, what do you want to do? You want to print the items in that list. So what this will do, I'll go to that list, and for the items can be anything. Can be anything inside that bracket. So for each item in that list, print that item. So if I execute this, you get 1, 2, 3, 4. So came here, took that item, which is 1, printed it out, then looped over to the next item and printed it out all the way the last one. So that's one example how to loop over a list. You can also use loops, for loop, to loop over a string. So suppose I have, that's our comment. It's good to add some comments. Suppose we had a string called my string, and the string is maybe hello world, maybe exclamation. And now we wanted to loop over this piece of text or string. So here we use the same thing. You can say all the characters in that word are called char. Each is called char. You can call it anything. You can say it's X, I, whatever you want to call it. But in this case, I say for the characters in our string, what do you want to do to them? We want to print our individual character called char. So if you go ahead and print that out, we get hello world. So a print on individual lines. And that's another example. Suppose now, instead of string, we wanted to print out numbers, maybe between 1 and 100. There are several ways you can do that, but the best one you can do is loop over a range, a specific range. So this function here, range, it just says the range. If you put a number maybe like 5 here, what this will do is just Python will understand what you mean. It's numbers from 0 to 5. So we can loop over that range from 0 to 5. And we can say for I representing the integers between 0 and 5. So we say I in, then we use the function range and say we want to print up to 5. Let's say something like that. And then we use colon at the end, and then hit enter. And please note this indentation. If you just put here and hit enter, it will automatically create you proper indentation. So you have to hit enter while your cursor is immediately after the colon. If you click enter, you can now write the piece of code you want to write here. So you can say print, maybe we print our items which are i's. So it's I from 0 to 5. If I print this out, we get 0, 1, 2, all the way to 4. And the reason we are printing it's like we are printing from 0 to index. So we don't print out the fifth option. We are printing 5 elements. 5 items beginning from 0. So basically we printed out 0 to 4. There are 5 in numbers. So it's like we are printing out a range of 5 numbers. If we can change this to 10 and execute that, we get 0 to 9. So here you specify the number of numbers that you want to print out. If it's 100, it's going to print out 0 to 99 because Python starts counting from 0. That's why it's doing that. And then also we can loop over another data type like Python dictionaries. And that's a very good example, in fact. Looping over a dictionary. Suppose now you had a dictionary called my dict and has this is the key and the value. It has several key values pairs. And just a recap, for dictionary, the key and the value are separated with comma, and those pairs are separated by commas. So suppose now you wanted to loop over this and get the items in that dictionary. So what we do, we use a for loop, and in that for loop, we have to specify 2 things. So it's for, then we want to print out the key and value in that dictionary. So there's one function that's applicable for dictionaries called items function. And so here you want to call your function, which is my dict dot items, and then you open and close the parentheses and no arguments in there. Don't add any argument inside the brackets, the parentheses, and hit enter. Make sure that your cursor was right after the colon so that when you hit enter, you get proper indentation. And what do you want to do? You want to print whatever you got here, the key and the value. And so you print key, comma, value. So we can go ahead and execute that. And what we get the key and the values printed out one at a time. So what it did, it came here, looped for items for key and values, the key and value in the first instance, it just printed it out there. Then it looped to the second pair of key and value and printed out banana and 2 key and value basically all the way. Even if you had 100, that's the same loop. It's gonna loop to all the key value pairs. Hope that is clear. And we can also do something else with we can also loop for the values. For the dictionary, can also get the values alone. You have our dictionary. Suppose now you only wanted to get the values. You can do that. And instead of items here, you have values. And then here, you have value and execute. So you get the values 1, 2, 3, 4. Suppose you wanted maybe the keys alone. So if you wanted the keys, you change this to key, and then these two keys. Those are just methods that you can use, and then print out the key. If you print that out, you get banana, apple, banana, orange. So basically, you just printed out the keys. You can basically do most things with the for loop. Yeah, so hopefully everything is clear. You can play with all these examples and make sure that you're typing them out, because that's the only way you can learn how to code well. So that's it for the for loop. The last control structure we are going to look at is the while loops. While loops allow you to execute a block of code repeatedly as long as a certain condition is met. The syntax is as follows. We write the keyword while, and then we specify the condition that you want to check. And here is where the piece of code that you want to execute while the condition you specified here is true. We can look at this in Jupyter Notebook. To demonstrate how to use while loops in Python, we're going to use an example. And suppose you wanted to print out the numbers from 0 to 9. To do this, you can of course use a for loop, but we want to use while loop. The first thing you do, you initialize the value of x to be 0, and then we want to print a number for as long as the value of x is less than 10. So that's the for loop condition, while loop condition, and we want to print the value of x. But then if I do this, we need to have a way of incrementing this from 0 to all the way to 9. So what we do, after printing the value of x, which at this point it's 0, the initial one, then we need to increment by 1. So we say is x, you add equal 1. So this was it's just doing this. You can just write here. It's just taking the value of x, assign it to x plus 1. This is what it does. So this has been this is the best way of writing it. So after doing that, if we execute this, we get the numbers from 0 all the way to 9. Remember, our initial value was 0. So what the while loop did, it checked 0 against 10 and ascertained that the value of x is less than 10. Hence, it printed out the value of x to be 0. Then it looped again. After printing it out, it incremented the value of x by 1. So our current value of x is 1. So came here, checked the condition again. 1 is less than 10, true. It prints out the value of x and increment x by 1 all the way to 9. But at the point where it prints out 9, at the point where it prints out the value of x to be 9 and increments it by 1, so we have the current value to be 10, then what happens is that it checks, is 10 less than 10? It's false. So the while loop breaks, and that's it. So at the end, it just prints out the values of x to be 0 to 9. But as we have seen, it's checking this condition. It's checking if the condition is true. If it happens that the condition is true, it will continue doing something. So for example, assume we had another, we decided to do this. You can have the same code, but instead of this one, assuming that we write this to be true. So if I try to print this out, let's see what happens. So what it does is start printing out the values. So it's infinite loop. It doesn't stop because the condition is always true. So what we do here in this case, we can interrupt the kernel by simply clicking on kernel and interrupt. That will basically stop the kernel and the execution of that piece of infinite code will stop. So as you have seen, that it's very important to have an exit plan because something can go wrong. And to ensure that nothing goes wrong, we are supposed to use an if condition and say if x is greater than, maybe let's say 10 or 9, then what do? We break the code or the execution. And that's basically it for that. So once you insert the break, and if you decide to click execute, then you see that we are printing out 0 to 9. And that's another way you can use to print x, the value of x being 1 to 9. And if the condition is always true, then we need to have an exit plan by using the break command, which will stop the execution of that piece of code here. This is the piece of code that will execute for as long as this is true. And since we've already declared the condition to be true, then we need that break. And that's it for the while loop. And that concludes this tutorial on control structures in Python. If you have any question, please do remember to drop a comment, and I'll get back to you with the feedback. And please do remember to subscribe, like my videos, and leave comments.